Minister, the consultation that led to the new National Housing Strategy for Disabled People 2022 to 2027 was inclusive, and it was welcomed positively across the board by disabled people and by the representative organisations. It raised hopes and expectations for civil society organisations and their members. However, more than a year later, the Housing Strategy Implementation Plan, initially expected for June of 2022, has still not been released at this stage, in spite of the urgency and despair faced by many disabled people waiting for housing. This forms part of the wider lack of implementation regarding the housing crisis. The Disability Capacity Review, published in 2021, called for consequent investments to be made to address housing support needs of disabled people. However, the promised action plan has also not been published yet. There is a worrying theme of a lack of timely implementation and funding of disability policies. So Article 19 of the UN CRPD, which commits signatories to, and I quote, recognise the equal right of all persons with disabilities to live in the community with choices equal to others, and to ensure that basically disabled people have the right to choose where to live and who to live with on an equal basis with everybody else, has not been realised, because we need to resolve the housing issues affecting people with disabilities before we can realise that right. So adequate funding, effective collaboration, robust management and oversight and reporting must form integral components of implementation. And in particular, sufficient funding must be provided to all areas of a disability housing policy. So we have for the decongregation process, for moving people out of nursing homes, and to deliver sufficient, fully accessible housing and support provision for those disabled people who are currently living in the community but want to live independently. And there's so many that live with aged parents, for example. For budget 2023, only a fraction of the overall increase for disability services has been allocated to improve the capacity of residential care, while the Disability Capacity Review said that addressing both demographic change and unmet need would range from an extra 230 million to 550 million a year by 2032. So there's a huge level of housing need among the disabled population. Over 1 in 4 people who are homeless, that's 27%, have a disability. 2,419 people are still living in congregated disability settings, despite the initial deadline to complete decongregation by 2018. More than 1,300 people with disabilities aged under 65 are living in nursing homes, as highlighted by the Ombudsman in his Wasted Lives report in 2021. And 6.6% of households on the social housing waiting list have an accommodation requirement due to disability. Some disabled people report being on the social housing waiting list for 10 years or more. The waiting time for people with disabilities has increased in recent years, while it has decreased for the general social housing waiting list. There are more than 1,500 people with intellectual disabilities who currently live with a primary carer over the age of 70, and more than 450 of these family carers are now aged over 80. So these figures are likely to be an underestimation of the level of need, as we hear from many disabled people with housing needs living with families or in unsuitable, inaccessible homes who are not on the social housing waiting list due to not thinking they will be successful or because they do not know the process to apply. So the delay to effectively plan the implementation of the new housing strategy, as well as the lack of acknowledgement of the delay itself and lack of clarity of the timeline, is an insult to the thousands of disabled people across the country struggling to access housing.
I'd like to thank Deputy Tully for raising this very important issue. The new joint National Housing Strategy for Disabled People 2022-27 was developed by my own Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, Department of Health and the Department of Children, Equality and Disability Integration and Youth, and was published, as you said, in 14th of January 2022. Strategy places an emphasis on disabled people having choice and control of living areas. Demonstrates that the Government's commitment to providing equal access to housing for all. The strategy is operating in the framework of Housing for All, which is committed to ensuring that affordable quality housing with an appropriate mix of housing design types provided within social housing, including universally designed units, is available to everyone in our society, including people with disabilities. The plan sets out over 4 pathways, a broad suite of measures to achieve its policy objective, together with a financial commitment of in excess of £4 billion per annum. Joint strategy sets out the vision for cooperation and collaboration of government, departments, state agencies and others in delivering housing and the relevant supports for disabled people over the next 5 years. Amongst the objectives is to meet the commitment under the United Nations Convention on on rights of persons with disability for disabled people to live independently as part of the community. Strategy aims to ensure people that disabled people have equal access to housing and clear pathways to access support services, promoting their inclusion in the community from a housing perspective. Work has been underway since publication to achieve its objectives set out in it. The Housing Agency, together with all departments and agencies involved, have been developing and implementing a comprehensive suite of actions involving all stakeholders is put in place and ensure delivery of the high-level objectives. A national implementation steering group has already been established and being chaired by the Housing Agency. The group is actively advancing implementation and will have responsibility for the delivery of the actions in the implementation plan. I've only recently got delegated powers in this area. I've made this a priority. I have worked with my officials on the document, and people would know my background. I have a particular commitment to people with disabilities. So I want to make this plan up-to-date, robust. We now have, I believe, a plan that is very much an up-to-date plan to bring it up to date. It's being looked at now by our core departments, which are Department of Health and Department of Children, and we're looking to publish in conjunction with the launch and awareness campaign in the coming weeks. So I give that assurance, both to you and more particularly people with disabilities. And I suppose what I really want is that this government is absolutely committed to people with disabilities. But it's not only just about publishing an implementation plan, it's about publishing an implementation plan that is up to date, robust, and delivers for people with disabilities. We're currently, as I say, finalising that. It's with the two departments, our other partnership departments, Department of Health and the Department of Children, Equality and Integration Affairs. And I'll be looking that we will now look to launch the document very shortly, along with an awareness campaign as well.
I do welcome the fact that it's going to be published in a few weeks, and I really sincerely hope that that is adhered to, because, as I said, we are a year over the expected date of publication. And I'm hoping again that the plan will see, the lack of coordination that's existed between housing and other supports will be addressed as well. Because, I mean, providing housing is one thing, but unless you provide the personal assistance service, for example, or the home care supports, people cannot live independently in the community without those. So it's to ensure that, the plan, the implementation plan, addresses all of those issues and ensures that there is coordination and cooperation across government departments. I mean, frequently I hear of people being on a social housing waiting list. Those with disabilities are on it, typically longer than others, and the hold-up is often because if the council provide the housing, the HSE or whatever other department is not prepared to provide the home supports, or vice versa, and one blames the other and nothing gets delivered. So I'm hoping that the strategy will address that. I suppose disability, I think, must be mainstreamed in all housing policy, I mean, including future-proofing the new housing stock that is currently being built under Housing for All, by building houses to Universal Design ++. Because we're getting older, our population is living longer, and many of us will have mobility issues in the future. So if our house is actually universally designed to start with, it's going to be much easier to adapt if needed in the future. Part M of the housing regulations currently only require housing to be wheelchair visitable, not wheelchair livable. So that's there's an urgent need to review those guidelines and reform the legislation. Just to mention as well, a few of the housing adaptation grants was started by the Department of Housing last year, and we've not yet seen the outcome of this review. There are many issues with that grant as well. I mean, the maximum grant, I think it needs to increase significantly. The current level is 30,000, but that is far below with the current, especially with the current costs, rise in the costs of construction. And I think the income thresholds and the means test is problematic, and it doesn't reflect the extra cost of disability as well that we know from the Indicon report that was published in 2021, where the cost of the disability is anywhere from 8,700 to 12,300 per year, depending on the level and severity of the disability.
Important issue. Just the two items. The Part M, you said towards visible rather than livable. You might forward me on your precise what you have in mind in that area in terms of M. We've carried out a review on the housing adaptation grants, which I'm looking at the moment in partnership with, working with Minister O'Brien on it. So it is an issue we're looking at. And can I just give, once again, to reassure and give that firm commitment to both to you as Deputy and to people with disabilities, the government, that the implementation plan is an absolute priority both for me and my department. We're working to have it published in the next couple of weeks, along with an awareness campaign. And that awareness campaign is being developed by the Housing Agency. And while disabled people continue to access all the various housing options available to them, the ultimate goal is to make our country an even better place for disabled people to live in, to access the right kind of housing or accommodation where disabled people have choices and are involved in consulted with on matters and issues that affect their lives. That's hugely important. Their independence. The new joint national housing strategy for disabled people and a more detailed implementation in line with the emerging implementation will ensure delivery of this goal. And this is a matter that I take a personal interest in, and obviously the department as well. And we will be published, the implementation, as I said, will be published next couple of weeks along with an awareness campaign with, I think, a very robust implementation plan for housing for people with disabilities. And I give that firm commitment here today once again. Thank you.